welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin, also known as Ilana Brooklyn. This is the comics podcast for folks who have lots of theories about which CEOs have been members of the Hellfire Club. Joining me tonight is one of my favorite X-Men writers who's starting to make her way through the X universe. It is Leah Williams. She is an American writer originally from Oxford, Mississippi. She writes comics for Marvel, Boom Studios, Dynamite Entertainment, and more. Her debut novel was a young adult fantasy book titled The Alchemy of Being 14, and she's currently writing its sequel, The Divinity of Hitting 15. Leah has also written nonfiction articles and essays for The Atlantic, Oprah Magazine, and Salon. Welcome to the show, Leah.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to finally get to talk with you and hang out.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely first met you at FlameCon, the LGBTQ comics con that is the best con in the history of cons.
It's amazing.
And you were on a panel, and I feel like it was right before you had any comics out, but that it had been announced that you were going to have stuff out.
Yeah, so that was right before kind of my official Marvel debut happened, which was I had 2 issues come out on Halloween 2018 on October 31st. And these were the first full issues that I wrote as kind of a solo flight writer, because I wrote a full issue, co-wrote it with Mark Guggenheim, the Excalibur reunion, and that was how I began 2018. That was the first full issue I had come out with Marvel. And then October 2018 is when I had the first full issues that I wrote on my own as the only writer with the main story. And that was super, super exciting.
Yeah, I know you've done stuff that wasn't X-Men related, and I've read the Dejah Thoris Barbarella crossover series that you're launching, and I'm excited to talk about that for sure. But I just associate you with X-Men in my head still now.
It's like it's something I talk about online too. Like it's I just think in terms of X-Men tweets. You know, it's a brain process that I have where I'm sort of constantly running simulations of dialogue and, you know, just imagining these characters. And most of the time it's not appropriate content for me to pitch. Like, it's not good enough. It's just these little moments I don't have a home for, and probably, you know, wouldn't make it past the Disney censors, I think. But I also keep my best stuff for, you know, the genuine pitches, and anything else, anything that like isn't good enough to pitch, isn't strong enough, I'm like, yeah, I can tweet that. It's fine.
That's interesting. I think about that a lot. Like what, you know, creators are, because some creators really do not talk about their work at all because they're concerned about being seen as like having ideas coming from other places maybe, or, you know, lots of concerns with that.
I don't have that concern. I mean, for me, it's mostly just like I'm releasing content into the wild that I know is never going to show up in something I pitch. Like, that's a decision I make beforehand. And it's also stuff that can't go into the comics. Like, I don't have room for it or something like that. Like, one that I almost tweeted just before I hopped on this call with you, I was thinking about North Star and Iceman, because I'm writing them both in Extremists. And for me, it's kind of like a lens that I wear. So I'll start to view things that I'm reading and just look at the world around me through these character interactions and just sort of compile all of these moments into one cohesive narrative. And it depends on, you know, whatever I'm working on at the time, and that changes a couple times in a week. I have to pivot to different projects. So I was just imagining this scenario that I would never be able to put in a comic because it's vulgar and it just doesn't fit Extremists, where North Star is just kind of flippantly like, oh, Bobby, go. Wait, can I cuss on this podcast?
Oh yes, please cuss as much as you'd like.
Okay. Where North Star is just like, oh my God, go fuck yourself. And then Bobby is just like, fuck me yourself, you coward.
Oh my gosh. I have to say, I hadn't thought about who the team was for Extremists. So you're going to be writing two of the X-Men's like most prominent canonical gay characters.
Yeah,
Basically.
and one of the less prominent but also canonically queer characters is Psylocke. She's bi.
Yes, she is. I'm so happy you're on that book because I know you know, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And this isn't going to be the book where, just because of the nature of Extremists, like love is forbidden. It's not going to be the book where we get to see Betsy again with a woman and that kind of thing, but it's because we don't get to see any of that, and there's a reason for it. So the fact that I'm like, I feel like I'm protectively hoarding all the queer characters in this book that I've gotten, because the challenge of telling a queer story without being able to use love and romance as like a shorthand, a visual shorthand for queerness is a really interesting challenge. But there's no way I would ever tackle this without confronting it head on and being like, okay, we got to do this right. It needs to be authentic and it needs to be honest, even if like, it's in the solicit text. Love is the greatest enemy. Like it's a challenge, but it's going to end up being something really, I think, strange and special once it does happen.
So yeah, I'm fascinated. I actually hadn't heard the solicit text. What's the premise of the series?
Um, Basically, the Extremists are kind of like a shock force troops to Marvelous X-Men, which is being written by Zach Thompson and Lonnie Nadler. They've got like the main X-Men book, and the Extremists, what I'm writing, they're like the wet works team. They're the ones actually doing the dirty work that goes behind maintaining a utopia, and it's dark, and it gets pretty grim, but at the same time we've got all these characters that are, their personalities are so bright and so recognizable, like Bobby and Betsy and Jean Paul and Jubilee, and they're working together. They're on the same team. So we get to familiarize ourselves with them first before we see what they're doing. And it's like, oh my God. And there's a reason for everything. And I keep telling people, like, I know when you read the solicit text, and you see the cover and like the title, it's Extremists, it's going to be scary, but like, if you have questions, I will answer them as much as I can going into this. And I promise once you read it and you start seeing what's going on, it'll make a lot more sense, because I know, like, Forbidden Love, having the Forbidden Love book could be bewildering when I do have, especially Jean Paul and Bobby on the same team. But there's no way I would do anything disingenuous or dishonest to their characters.
Well, it's definitely the sort of thing where I'm like, I'm really thankful that you're on it, because it's not something I would trust heterosexual people to write, basically.
That's kind of how I feel about it too. Like when I'm working on it, I'm like, oh God, I'm so happy I'm the one writing this, because I can see all of the ways where it could be so easily, the queerness could be so easily glossed over just because of the nature of the book, which was the premise of it that I knew going into it. It's this book is part and parcel with this part of the story, because it's the angle of this event that we're getting in Extremists, and all of the different books have different angles, and it's all coming together to produce something really interesting. But the fact that I'm the one on this book, and I can like kind of plant a flag and be like, okay, so we're gonna go this route, and we're not gonna ignore the opportunities to bring up sexuality, even if we have to go through some hurdles to do it authentically. Like we're definitely going to take the harder route because it would be so easy just to, gloss over it all in a world where love is the enemy, to not do anything authentically with the characters and their queerness. But I think because I am not straight, I'm able to see the different routes that can be taken, and I'm very thankful that I'm on this.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exciting, and it's a cool team to have there. The cover looked exciting, and I have not kept up with like what's happening in the main X books. I read the X-Men annual that was the reunion of Excalibur that you and Mark wrote. That was really quite charming and lovely.
Such a joy. Yeah, Excalibur is my favorite comic series of all time. The original Excalibur with Alan Davis and Chris Claremont working on it is just such a joy for me.
Had you worked, how did you connect with Mark to work on
it? I was actually, okay, so he was working on X-Men Gold at the time, and he kept getting approached by fans about, you've got Kitty and Kurt and Rachel all in the same book again. Like, we would really love to see an Excalibur reunion. And because, the X-Men titles are planned out like, oh my gosh, 8 months in advance, like, there's no way he could rearrange everything that had been set into motion just to accommodate that. But he was like, okay, well, this would be perfect for an annual. And he approached Chris Robinson. He was like, I think this would be a good opportunity to not only do that, but to co-write it with somebody. Here's the plot I'm thinking about that we can kind of have them springboard off of. Do you have any ideas? And then Chris was like, yeah. And he suggested me, because I am such a huge fan, and this would be a good way for me to work with a more senior writer and kind of see how things are done beyond just backup shorts, which is what I had been doing before this. Mm-hmm. So it was just an invaluable opportunity because of that alone, and also because of what we were writing. Like, it's still, it is so fulfilling that I was able to work on that.
Yeah, it was really charming. So then who got to do that redesign of Brian with like the update hair and beard, which I was like, yes, excellent choice. Someone's paying attention to fashion.
I think that was actually Aletha Martinez's choice. So I got to work.
She's so good.
She's so good. And when I found out that she was working on this, that was another thing that was like, because World of Wakanda, her work on that was just gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. So I was really excited to work with her. And she gave Brian this like beautiful hipster dad makeover, and I'm so into it. And I actually requested it. I used it as a reference material when I wrote, the one-page Braddock family reunion in the X-Men holiday special that just came out, because it's so charming the way she drew everybody.
Yeah, she's really one of those artists who I just don't think people recognize how much of her work they have seen, and how amazing her designs are. Yeah.
And she's so amazing in person too. She's like she's a ray of sunshine embodied. She's just so charming and lovely. She's all around awesome.
Yeah, well, I was really happy to see that combination of people. And then I guess, the other annual that you worked on was the Domino annual, which I really enjoyed. Gail is just one of my favorites in superhero comics, and like all time, for real. And it was cool to see you collaborating on that. Like, how does it work contributing a story to an annual where she has a lot of different contributors sort of doing pieces? Like, how does that all work?
So the way it worked in this is Chris Robinson orchestrated the whole thing, and I give him so much credit for it. I've done like really lengthy Twitter threads on the work that Chris Robinson did as an editor on the Domino Annual, because I could see it from afar. And since I was the one doing the interstitial pages, I was the only one who got to read all of the different scripts beforehand, so I would know how to link them together into one kind of cohesive narrative. So I was able to see like what Chris had done and the stories he had gotten from different people and the way they would land next to each other. And it wasn't something that, as writers, we knew we were doing when we wrote these different stories. And he basically orchestrated a really potent distillation of the character Domino, and he started it with Gail Simone's story with Domino, and it's one that helps people like get into the current series, the ongoing that Gail's working on, you know, starting with the familiar voice. So not only does it bring in the newer readers to Domino, but people who have already been reading the Domino series, and they, you know, recognize Gail's work with her more. And then we had Dennis Hopeless's story, and we had stuff that kind of took place on the periphery. It was just really amazing, and I absolutely credit Chris Robinson with what made that annual feel so good.
So who came up with the support group for non-passing mutants?
That was mine. That was something that I had been talking to Chris about for a while, and it started out as a joke, just like, so I really earnestly love the Ugly Mutants. I have a very soft spot in my heart for them, because to me, they're what makes X-Men comics so special. The fact that here we have these creatures that in a different body of work, in a different genre, would be considered something monstrous. Their mutant ability would be like, you know, maggot and husk and marrow. It would be what disfigures them in a different work, but because this is X-Men comics, it's what empowers them. And that's why, you know, I roll hard for the Uggos on any team, any X-Men iteration, just because they deserve the best and they deserve to be protected for being heroes and not being conventionally hot. So, you know, like I talked to him about that before, and then we were just kind of tossing ideas back and forth, and we both arrived at, you know, like a support group for this kind of thing. And, you know, maybe even Dupe would be there. Even though he's not a mutant, he still looks like a thick booger.
I mean, what I really loved with that one is like, this is an actual thing that comics need to talk about, like mutants passing and mutants not passing, and do a good job with it. And I loved also how I actually wasn't sure which character it was, but there was a character who is saying he's complaining about being fetishized, right? So it's like, on the one hand, you can be you're socially ostracized and people are always looking at you because you look very different, but then sometimes it's like the attention that you are getting, that's positive attention on one level, is actually still objectifying you because it's sort of like fetishizing you.
So the character that you're talking about, who first brought that up and then Toad agreed with him, is Kylun, and he looks like he has leonine features. He looks kind of lion-esque, but his coloring, his skin and hair, it looks like an old bruise. So it's purple and orange. And I love him. He's great. He's a great character, also from Excalibur.
Okay.
And he is bringing up furry art, basically. And I kind of took a leap of faith with having Toad agree with him and be like, yeah, man, I know how you feel. Because while I had not seen the Toad art at that point, the not safe for work stuff, NSFW, Toad fan art, I just took a leap of faith and assumed that it existed. And when
the internet, everything exists.
Exactly. And then, sure enough, when that story was published in the Domino Annual, Toad's fans came forward and they're like, haha, yeah, it's the tongue. And they showed me the fan art. So it was honestly very sweet and very touching that Toad's fans were just so happy to see him get some positive screen time, you know, not just be villainized, even though he is a villain.
So what was interesting to me also, talking about like the fan art thing is, you're talking about fictional characters, right? So, you know, on the one hand, we can sort of have this like belief, like, you know, I don't like people shouldn't be judging other people for like their quirky sexual desires, proclivities, or fixations. Like, go with God, do your thing. I'm not going to give somebody grief because they like to make erotic art about Toad. But then the comic, it's like, well, it's actually real people who are being who are like seeing, who are seeing the art, and you're like, it does feel intrusive to have that art being made of you if you're actually a real person, as these characters are within the world of the comic.
That's definitely how I feel about the real life fan fiction that some people write about, you know, like the One Direction guys or something like that. It does, or writing about celebrities. It does feel super strange. And I say this as someone, so I have a deep history with fan fiction. It goes back many, many years to when I was just a wee thing. And my very first encounter with fan fiction was somebody's like self-insert Mary Sue and all the Hanson brothers, like each of them. So, I mean, I didn't know it was weird at the time. I was just like, wow, I'm 5. This is great. But it does feel like something strange now, a strange phenomenon of the modern era.
Yeah, it's, you know, like the little lines about between like fictional and real people like it's pretty clear to us out here. But it was interesting to me in terms of the narrative. It's like, oh yes, because in the comic these are real people, and that would be really fucked up.
And I just imagined, you know, like if you are, a lot of the work I do in the X-Men is grounded in trying to both sympathize and empathize with their view and what they're going through and try and making it authentic. So I'm imagining these characters, like some of which look like a green potato and some kind of look strange but are still conventionally hot, like Domino, and some that aren't conventionally hot but definitely satisfy an existing fetish, and that, like, if there are furries in Earth 616, the main Marvel universe, and I'm sure there are, then they would look at some of these mutants like Hank McCoy and be like, yes please, and they might get a little weird about it.
Yeah. You don't want to be fetishized. You don't want to be
exactly.
like just because of physical characteristics and not treated like a full human being. So.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of also just like talking about X-Men, I loved your What If Magik comic so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was really sold on that. I listened to a podcast called Tighten Up the Defense, where they are going through every single issue of the Defenders from like the 70s and 80s, as well as every issue of Teen Titans, and discussing them. But as a result, I have heard a lot of jokes and insights about Doctor Strange that are informed by people who have done a great deal amount of reading Doctor Strange. So it was a lot of fun for me sort of seeing, like, they have a reoccurring joke they refer to, the Sanctum Sanctorum as Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctimonium. Yeah. And so sort of seeing Doctor Strange sort of jump in, assume he knows what's going on when he encounters Magik, and assert his authority because he's like, I'm a doctor, as if that means that he's trustworthy and that she should listen to him. And her being a young girl who's been exploited and abused her whole life, and being like, no, you being an authority figure does not mean I should listen to you or trust you.
Yes.
Was such a great read.
That was something. So like I was saying earlier about Extremists and seeing You know, the queerness in it, the things that needed to be authentic. It's the very same thing with What If Magik, where the whole time I was writing it, I was looking at it like, okay, no, and then this, because just the situation that we were proposing, you know, what if Magik becomes Sorcerer Supreme? The very first thing that both my editor Annalise Bisa and I landed on was, you know, we start from her getting out of limbo, and then we just tell the truth, and we just like authentically deliver this story where Doctor Strange, in all his like ignorance about teen girls and what's going on with her, would just be like, after she finishes saying that she was kind of abused for years and years under the guise of a sorcery apprenticeship, he listens to all that and he's just going to be like, Ileana, I'm going to offer you a sorcery apprenticeship. Like, of course she would get mad at that. Of course she would fly down the hall in a rage and try and get out of there. But to his credit, that's also like Doctor Strange is smart enough to be like, when she calls him out on it, he's like, oh, you're right, I didn't think about that, and present the exit to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I just appreciate, I thought the whole issue just did such a great job of talking about, you know, a teen girl dealing with resolving abuse and trauma and surviving it. And
it was a very raw thing for me to write. Like, there are panels in that just shipwreck me emotionally. But I also knew the whole time, like, this is going to be something special once we come out on the other side of it, because, you know, I had seen art coming in from Felipe Andrade, and just the way my editor and I had been talking about it, like sort of in cahoots the whole time, down to every single last detail, like the cloak and why she makes a staff instead of a sword, and the panel where we see her as a little girl, that one panel, we got very specific on that, where I was like, it's important to me that we keep the perspective the same and not punch in on a close-up, because then people might not understand like that she's a little girl here. So we need to show how small she is and put her in an oversized t-shirt, because that's what's gonna land. I could feel it. Just, I don't know, I feel like so many of us grew up wearing oversized t-shirts as nightgowns.
yeah, I mean, and you just really convey how her whole experience in limbo was like grooming. Basically, it's like a metaphor for grooming.
It
and
is,
thinking
yeah.
about that in the context of the surviving R. Kelly, you know, documentary series, which is just concluding now. It feels really timely.
And it's also something that knowing you're being groomed is not often a conscious realization. It's usually something that comes with hindsight when you're looking back on your past experiences. So Ileana in What If Magik, she knows, she has gotten to the point where she knows that she has been groomed for over half her life by an abusive sorcerer, and she knows why he's losing interest in her as she gets older, and his games with her, his training is becoming more and more brutal. It's something that she's aware of. So when she finally is able to free herself from limbo because of her teleportation powers, God, she's angry. She's so angry. And the first thing that happens when she comes out of limbo is she tries to go home to her parents. But of course, only a couple minutes has passed on Earth, so her parents don't recognize her, and they chase her away from the family farm with a shotgun. So it goes from, you know, like finally escaping and wanting to go home to being chased away at gunpoint by her parents who don't recognize her because she's been in hell for 7 years, to hitchhiking and wandering to Doctor Strange. So she's feral. She really is feral.
Yeah. Yeah, he was super powerful. As was the Emma comic. I just told a friend of mine, like, this is the best Emma comic I've read in a lifetime. So, like,
thank
for
you.
real.
That was another one that was raw for me.
You got to do Emma Frost and art Chris Bachalo, which, like, for a whole generation of comics readers, he's like a super iconic creator.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, how did you work on that with him?
He was super fun to work with. He is very collaborative and has lots of questions, and there was so much in that script where I deliberately was sort of like giving him room to be Chris Bachalo, like, you know, so on this page, here's what needs to happen, but I wasn't providing the specifics because, you know, it's Chris, like, just let him be Chris, let him do his thing. And when I found out that he was going to be working on it with me, I, like, the way this conversation went down exactly was Jordan, you know, just kind of casually texted me. He was like, oh, hey, I think I have a line on an artist. So I replied back with a bunch of eyes emojis. And then he, after a moment, was like, okay, are you sitting down? And I was. But then when he told me that it was Chris, I burst into tears and had to go lay down because, you know, his work, even with Emma and Generation X, like, it's so formative for me. And later in Uncanny, when Bendis was writing, it's huge for me. It just occupies so much of my X-Men heart. And I couldn't believe that this was real. And the script immediately, because I think this was just in the outlining stage when I found this out, but once I learned who was going to be on art, the script immediately started to come alive in my mind because I could just see it. I could see the whole thing in Chris's artistic voice, and it made it that much more meaningful for me to write.
Mm-hmm. Whew. The humor was really sharp, and the turnaround that happened. I realized I haven't decided if, like, I want to spoiler it or not. I mean, it's been out for a long time, right? When did it come out?
It came out on Halloween, so that and the What If Magik were my, like, official kind of Marvel debuts.
Okay, so we're just gonna say, folks, if you haven't picked up the Emma Frost Black individual comic yet, do it right now, and then come back and listen to the rest of this. It's fabulous. It's a small little purchase. Just go do it. Okay, so, like, when the reveal, like, that how she literally played every single person happens, I was just so gleeful because that's such a great understanding of the character. But I did get such a great, like, laugh out of Rogue forcing her to meet her in a Walmart. Good God.
That was one thing that when I first pitched it, felt super goofy, and I was like, oh, they're not gonna let me do this. And then Jordan's just like, yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt like a great way to fuck with her, basically. So, I mean, is Emma's the Black King now?
She is, yeah.
How is that like going to be the going forward status quo in comics for a while? That's really exciting.
Yeah, that was hugely exciting for me to learn that it would, you know, not immediately get retconned, because it's something that I've been, like, even before I was a Marvel writer, Emma Frost's hostile takeover of the Hellfire Club and becoming Black King, like, elevating Emma to the status of Magneto, making her the Black King, was, you know, literally something that I daydreamed about. And before I ever knew I would end up actually writing for Marvel, this is just a fantasy. So being able to do it and then have it be treated as the current status quo, It's how she's being written in Jessica Jones. It's how she's being written in Iceman. It's how she's being written in Uncanny X-Men as the Black King. And it's just incredible to me that it's real.
Yeah, it's a big landmark, and I like the description, definitely. Her, like the story just starts with, like, she's going up the tower, she's going up the ranks, she's and her relationship with the woman who she had on the inside is like, it's a lot of layers of meaning in it that I hope people go back and give it a multiple times of a read.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope they don't, because there are some people who reacted to it like, okay, well, we trust you with her, but we don't trust her being part of the Hellfire Club because, you know, we've been burned before and people have, like, villainized her when we don't see her as a villain. But I don't see her as a villain at all. I see her as an anti-hero and somebody who is incredibly compelling and nuanced, and just very, very complicated, and the kind of complicated that comes from sort of a patchwork quilt over the years of the different ways that she's been portrayed, because once you put it all together, which was very much what I was trying to do, trying to reconcile all of these aspects, because I see her that way. I see her as this immensely complicated figure. Being able to put everything together in X-Men Black was always one of my goals from the start, and make it complicated and nuanced and have her be ruthless, but at the same time show tenderness, a spot of tenderness towards the woman she had on the inside, to show these sides of her all at once, all at the same time.
And anytime a woman gets to beat the shit out of Sebastian Shaw is great, but anytime where Emma beats the shit out of Sebastian Shaw is truly a great day in comics.
Oh my God. It was really cathartic to write that. So I have no emotional distance from Emma. She's my favorite character, and I used to have a hard time saying who my favorite character was, but then I wrote X-Men Black Emma Frost and was terrified the whole time because I felt like I was careening, you know, and I was like, oh no, okay, so I'm like fangirling out, and this is scary for me because I feel like I have no control over this, but the scene where she's just knocking the shit out of Sebastian Shaw, I even tried to give him some moments, humanizing moments in that too. It was really cathartic to write that because at the time I was writing it, it was when all of the news about the child detainment camps was first starting to break, and reading about that while writing this character who is famously protective of children, and children especially, and was abused as a child, and is like beating the shit out of this rich abuser,
who you know is someone who's like invested in the corporations that are profiting off of the detention camps.
Exactly.
I have a list at backersofhate.com from my old job. I have a whole website about all the companies that are profiteering off of like the actual like prison camps and concentration camps of children at the border. Anyway, so yeah, like he's totally like, this brings it back together with my opening line. But yeah, like he's on the board. He's on the board and invested in all those companies. So
yeah, exactly. So that was amazing to write during that time, and I sobbed when I was writing the last page of it, just because, you know, this is something I've always dreamt about happening with this character, and I was the one chosen to write her. I was allowed to pitch this. I was able to write exactly what I wanted to write, and then in the end have her address grief in a way that I've always, you know, been desperate to see from her, and her especially. It was just amazing for me.
Thank you. Well, coming out on Wednesday this week, we have, or I guess whatever, I'm not exactly sure when this is going to be out, but coming out like very, very shortly, or perhaps already, you wrote a comic you're doing a series for Dynamite that is Dejah Thoris and Barbarella crossover series.
Mm-hmm.
I have been lucky enough to read a preview copy. I enjoyed it greatly. I don't know if I've ever read much of an American, like contemporary Barbarella, you know? I mean, for me, I always thought, I first found the character through through the movie, you know? I think is probably true for a lot of us in the States.
Oh, same. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah. How did you get attached to that book, and what's your interest in these particular characters?
So it was something that Matt Idelson, my editor, approached me about because, you know, they had arranged with the licensing people with either property for this crossover to happen, I think. But and he asked me if I would write it. And I don't even know if I was the first choice for it. But I do know that as soon as their names were, you know, brought up together in the same sentence at the same time, I immediately saw the possibilities for it because, you know, Barbarella, she was introduced in the 60s, you know, as she was meant to be counterculture. She was a character who was very sexually liberated, and this was part of, you know, the sexual liberation for women in the 60s, and had a lot of revolutionary meaning then. And since time, what's revolutionary about her has kind of changed, and then we have Jane Fonda playing Barbarella in the movie. So it's gotten a little... it's grown so much over the years, and now she's like this. I mean, I'm writing her as a pansexual blonde space James Bond, is what I tell people. She's very much like Doctor Who, where like she's so smart and she knows how to solve problems, and she doesn't need help. She doesn't rely on people, and is just altruistic. She helps because it's the right thing to do, and she's not getting, you know, financial compensation for it or glory, and people don't often know that it's her sort of arranging all of these situations. She's motivated to do what's right because it's right, because she's a good person. And then we have Dejah Thoris, who was a character invented by Edgar Rice Burroughs over 100 years ago, or almost 100 years ago, maybe. Yeah, like John Carter and the Prince of Mars. And for about 100 years, she was just the ingenue, the damsel in distress who got kidnapped and held hostage, and she always needed help, she always needed saving. And it wasn't until later years that Dejah started to get, you know, more of her own agency and autonomy, and solve problems on her own, and like get her own spotlight. And a lot of that did happen with Dynamite Entertainment and their comics. Amy Chu is the one writing Dejah Thoris's ongoing series right now, which is where I got a lot of inspiration.
Oh, and, cool. Amy's great.
Yeah, Amy's fantastic. So like, this is what I had in mind when, you know, they brought up a Barbarella and Dejah Thoris crossover miniseries. And I know, and I also knew from the start that people would look at this and be like, okay, this is an excuse to have two, like, hot licensed property babes star together and pretty much nothing else. And maybe it is. Maybe that was the reasoning for it. Who knows? But the fact that I'm the one writing it, I am having a blast. It is hard sci-fi with hot babes, and the amount of scientific research I've done for this, because everything they're talking about, every weird bit of science and sci-fi, like quantum physics, it is all grounded in actual science and actual research. And it's so much fun.
Yeah. The art work is also just like really vivid and trippy.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So Herman Garcia is doing the art, and he is incredible. He is just schooling me in terms of like the dynamism and kinetics, and I'm learning so much from him on just the positioning of these shots and that kind of thing.
Cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed them, and they do have characters do have really fun chemistry together. One of the things I noticed is the moment where Barbarella starts flirting with Dejah Thoris. She's not making eye contact with the metal pasties. She's making eye contact with the sword that got drawn on her.
Yeah, that was something that I scripted too, because I was just
Yay.
like, I asked permission, like if I could make this gay, because I'm never sure. Like I always want things to be gayer, but I don't know what's allowed or what's not with licensed properties. So I sort of like made my case for it. And
I mean, certainly Barbarella, she's like probably having
well, exactly,
completely drawn for the eyes of heterosexual men, but nevertheless sex with other women in
she's
comics
canonically
from the time
pansexual.
period.
And in the current ongoing Barbarella series at Dynamite, written by Mike Carey, she hooks up with a woman first, and it's not male gazy in the way that it's done. It's actually Handmaiden's Tale-y in the way that it's done. So it's good. And
Mike Carey is a good guy, so yeah, that's interesting.
He's a good one too. And so I brought that up, but we haven't seen Dejah with a woman yet, so that's what I wasn't sure about. And of course, Matt was just like, "Oh yeah, sure," which I think is so funny, because every time I've like cautiously or timidly approached any editor that I've worked with at Marvel or at Dynamite and been like, is it okay to make it gay? Like, can I do this, please? and I'm like so scared about the consequences. They're always just like, oh yeah, sure, go for it. So God bless Matt Edelson is the point here. And this was another one of those opportunities that I could see at a distance, like the friends to or enemies to reluctant allies to friends to lovers thing, because I know Barbarella would just take one look at Dejah Thoris, even if it's from the point of a sword, and be like, well, hi.
Totally. Yeah, I thought that was really fun. It's interesting because like there's so much ridiculously hot pin-up-y art of Dejah Thoris. Like it just exists. There's also lots of really bad, because lots of artists have drawn her, and artists can sometimes do a bad job. So I was really intrigued to see how she would get drawn and characterized in the story. And it's not a character that I really know anything about, but I always I was always sort of impressed by the balls of Edgar Rice Burroughs inventing her from being a culture where like, well, they don't really wear clothes.
Yeah.
They just wear jewelry. And so then the workaround is like, okay, so they don't wear clothes, they wear jewelry, but we can't show certain things because we're publishing this in the age of pulps. So the jewelry they're wearing is metal pasties. Problem solved. Like, yeah. Okay, you guys are brilliant. Keep it up. But like, then I have to say, like, do men wear metal pasties? Like what what is the clothing convention for people of the Marsian persuasion?
They should. I mean, if they aren't wearing metal pasties, they should be wearing metal pasties. And what are the merkins? Metal merkins?
Like metal it's like yeah.
Because, yeah, that's what the canon is, that they don't wear clothes, they don't have shame about their bodies. So in the books, they're just naked. They wear some jewelry. But in any visual representation, they're just scantily clad with all of the like off-limits Western bits covered with something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they really wanted to commit to the metal pasties, then they would make men wear metal pasties too, because to me, that would make more sense than just the women.
Thank you. I feel like we understand each other very well. Well, I really did enjoy the first issue. And yeah, you're right. It's like hard sci-fi. And it was interesting sort of seeing, I literally had no idea where any of it would be going. And I was really pleased with it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Barbarella was, I believe, the first like erotic comic by a mainstream publisher. I mean, in Europe, but like nevertheless, that everything else has sort of been underground, self-published comics until that one. So
yeah,
treading into some historic ground. That's great. Meanwhile, you've also done comics for Boom, like Choose Goose, and
yeah.
so yeah. How do you get to wear both of those hats?
I don't really know. It started with Marvel, and I think that is what opened other doors for me, because it gave me this layer of visibility that I had never had before. And even though I had only written a short, I got approached by Boom Studios, who like they often reach out to younger and newer talent. And
They're great about that.
They asked me about a few different properties, and one that is really close to my heart is Adventure Time, and I was really excited about that immediately. I love Adventure Time.
Yeah. I cried so much at the end. Good God.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so happy about Marceline and Bubblegum kissing. Was like the most edifying thing.
Yeah. I feel very, very tender about that. It's so sweet, and fans waited for it for so long.
Can you imagine if that had been out when we were kids, like how much better the world would have been?
I think about that all the time, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, it's part of the reason why I know representation doesn't seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but it's a big deal to me, because I grew up in a place where I didn't know that you could be something other than gay or straight, and for the longest time. And I experience opposite sex attraction. I mostly experience same sex attraction, but I experience opposite sex attraction enough to know that it's inappropriate for me to identify as a lesbian. You know what I mean? So for the longest time, I thought I was just something monstrous. And it wasn't until like years and years later, I was an adult, just sort of like scrolling on Tumblr, and I saw kids talking about their own experiences with this, and I was just like, oh, okay. And it sort of like brought into sharp relief how, oh, straight girls don't do that. Okay, no, straight girls definitely don't have relationships with other girls. I don't know why I thought I was straight for the longest time. And it makes me wish that I had other canonically queer role models to look to as a kid, because while the X-Ladies were fundamental in my queer feelings and my queer development, I didn't know that that's what was happening. And I wish I had.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things. I have an essay I need to place, and I'll put a pin in it and say I have an essay coming out about these things later. But yeah. So I think it's so. So Adventure Time is everything in the kids these days. I'm very excited for them being able to have these things. But yeah. So you got to write an Adventure Time comic, and that's really freaking cool.
Yeah, it was super exciting. And again, it was one of those things where the idea I pitched it being like, yeah, they're never going to let me do this. They're never going to let me do this. But it was something that I had always wanted to do, which was tell the kind of origins of Choose Goose and make it rhyming couplets the whole time.
It's really tragic.
It's really sad. But that's kind of like, I love that. I love when you take a goofy character and like people take them as a joke at first and then, like Dexter, give them a
Oh
really
God,
tragic
Dexter!
origin.
I can't deal with Dexter because it's too sad.
It's so sad. It makes me weep, but it
For folks
works.
who are like, "What the hell are you talking about?" That's the Green Lantern, the Red Lantern, who's a cat. The
Hmm.
origin story of the Red Lantern, who's a cat, is exactly as tragic as you would think it would be to make a cat a Red Lantern,
Yeah.
an avatar of anger and rage.
Yes.
Anyway, well, you have your own creator-run series coming out this summer, I believe. With what tell us a little bit more about that.
So it is called Render, and it's written in code, actual like HTML code. So it's got some punctuation in there, but it's pronounced Render.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I call it like sea punk tech noir. So it's cyberpunk, but it's taking place on an island setting, and that factors into a huge world building way. And it is about this witch who is also a photographer, but photography for her is kind of a tool of divination.
Hmm.
So she uses a regular camera, it just works differently for her. And she has this art series, this photo series she's debuting called Eyes of Death. And it's photos of the last thing people see before they died. And of course, this catches the attention of the authorities, and they're like, well, what is she doing? If this is authentic, it means she's like tampering with dead bodies, or she's a fraud and she's lying to all these people. Obviously, we have to come and investigate. And they put Detective Natalie Bixel on the case, and she has built her career on kind of busting cases of magical fraud around their city of New Delhi. And, she's the best one for the task. But she's kind of intrigued by Emmy Ocampo, who's our main character, intrigued and attracted to her. But she kind of makes a deal with Emmy. And she's like, look, if you help me solve a case using your powers or whatever, I'll drop these fraud charges and, let you go. So they end up partnering together to solve a series of kind of grim murders around the city.
Oh, interesting. Those are lots of genre beats that I like, so I'm excited. And the artist you're partnering with, that looks really great. Who's the artist?
Her name is Lenka Simikova, and she hasn't done much sequential work yet. So I'm really, really excited to kind of have her make her mark with 10 issues like this. And it's looking great so far. She's nailing the really like moody and noir aspect of it, but it's also so much of it is sea based or ocean based and has sea life themes throughout all of it. And she's getting all of that too, and all of the like neon runes and craziness of this world. It just fits with her style so much.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, and that'll be from what publisher?
This is coming out from Lion Forge.
Lion Forge. That's right. Okay, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, they're doing a lot of exciting things.
Yeah, yeah, they are.
Well, I guess we're coming on an hour. I sort of want to wrap up question. Like I feel like one of the things that I've heard you speak about sort of is like, you're like a published writer of young adult fiction, but you're also coming into writing comics as somebody who coming through fandom. And I think that that's something that has been complicated for, I think, like older generations to like understand, which is funny because everybody who worked at like the Marvel bullpen of the 70s was all growing up reading the Marvel bullpen of the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that something to do with the way that fans have interacted with the comics they love, and also like not just being as many dudes sort of throws some folks for a loop, I guess. I don't know if you have thoughts about like getting to write comics, like, you know, for big publishers, like now after coming at it from having been active in fandom before.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say is that I write professional fan fiction. If you write for a licensed property, and I mean, if you're good at it or if you're doing your job, then you should be a fan too. And this is a form of fan fiction, what we're doing. The difference is it's just much, much more visible, and we get paid to do it. And it occupies the same area of my brain, with not even the same sort of restraints that you would think I would have actually writing for properties that I used to write X-Men fan fiction for. It's amazing and exhilarating, and I feel like I'm getting away with something. It's so, I sort of maintain this feeling of like, yeah, bro, I don't know how I got here either, but it's great. And I guess you would call that imposter syndrome, but I'm gonna kind of keep running with it as much as I can. But I'm also, once I learned that it helps me and that I wouldn't suffer consequences from being like a visible fangirl online and just being fans of the characters that I'm writing. Because there was like, for the first year after I started writing for Marvel, I didn't talk about characters the way that I do now, where I'm just sort of like shit posting. Because even though that's what I'm accustomed to, I thought it was going to be unprofessional for me because I didn't see other writers being that messy on Twitter or anything like that. But eventually, I don't know, I just had too much earnest like affection and love, and I really missed having these conversations. I missed being a part of the fandom. I started doing it again, and then I was encouraged recklessly by other fans. So now I just shitpost about these characters in front of my editors, and it's fine. They don't care. I was worried about a lot of things going into writing comics professionally before learning that, like, oh, I didn't need to be worried about that.
I mean, there's generations of writers, by which I mean people who are like 10 years older than you, basically, who are saying, like, if you do this, you will not get hired. And you've just, like, broken all that logic. You know?
Yeah, because it's not true at all. Like, the difference is I don't read fan fiction as much as I used to, because to me that feels more like trespassing, because what if these people want to take this story someday and pitch it? Like, it's not okay for me to participate that way. But I wrote X-Men fan fiction for the Explain the X-Men holiday fan fiction exchange as recently as last week. And to me, like, it felt so special to be able to write, you know, custom content for one of Ilyana Rasputin's biggest fans, to give them 10 pages of Ilyana and Kitty fan fiction for Christmas. Like, it felt really special to me to be able to do that. And it's something that I know I would never pitch, and it would never get published. And it's something that they knew coming from me, like me writing it in this way would also automatically mean that it would then never get pitched or published. But that's just because it's like sweet lesbian holiday fluff, and we know that Marvel is not close to publishing that yet. We're working on it. But it still doesn't mean that I can't write it in the meantime, that I can't just do it and talk about these things online and be a fangirl and say all the X-Men are gay on like the FlameCon X-Men panel that I was on, because it's the appropriate context for me to be doing that in. And it's also important to me to keep these conversations going and to not let queer fans feel like they aren't being listened to and they aren't being seen, because like this is the biggest difference between me coming from the fandom and somebody else, because I know what it's like to read these comics for years and not see yourself represented, or see iterations of womanhood that make you feel so uncomfortable and undermined. And like, this is what I have in my head. And I know I have a position to do something different and to be the change that I've always wanted to see, you know? And
Yeah.
I get a lot of bravado and a lot of backbone from the fandom. I don't, I mean, that's just basically it. Like, I don't make a move without knowing exactly how it's going to land.
You mean among the fans?
Among the fans. Yeah, among the fans. That's,
I mean, it's so interesting because, like, to me, it almost feels like we're more likely to have a character, an existing character be announced as being queer if there's been no fan discourse or headcanons or conversation around it, than if it's a character who we all are like, this is the most obvious coding in the history of mankind. Like, that's just generally feels like how things have been. There's exceptions, you know. I always point to the example of Shatterstar and Richter being a case where like fans were saying, hey, this is pretty gay, and then the writer was like, oh yeah, no, that's pretty gay, I'll have them be a couple, good call. You know, that's having been like the exception to the rule, because it feels like, you know, I'm gonna it feels like they're more likely to decide that a completely random X-Men is LGBTQ than to be like Kitty Pryde is bisexual. Like, this is something which is said by generations of text. Chris Claremont has said that was his intent. Even if it wasn't his intent, that wouldn't matter because it's there, but it was, you know. It feels almost like they'd rather, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's not the writers and it's not the editors. It has a lot to do with sort of corporate standards that Marvel is using as guidelines now. So there's no human interference in any character getting straight washed, you know what I mean? It's all just like how do you argue with that? How do you be like, guys, please, Kitty is so bi. She, like, look at this panel of her licking icing off another woman's finger. Come on. This is overtly sexual. And I don't know. And that's a tough one too. Like, the Kitty Pryde thing is one that I'm actively pained by every day because I think she and Rachel need to be together, and there's
it's
so
only
much...
what Chris Claremont told us. I mean,
exactly, you know. Exactly, and it's in Excalibur. It's you can see it, and also her interactions with Ileana too. You can see it on the page so many times. So I talk about that a lot online because I feel like there's no way they're gonna let me write Kitty ever again. So at this point I'm just like, okay, well, you know, they're not gonna let me near her, because I've made my feelings very strong. So they're not gonna want that, and I might as well talk about it online, because if I can keep proving again and again, like, look, this is how people feel. I have collected the evidence right here. I have been talking about this for years online. I have codified it for you. Here's how it's going to land. Then it's still something helpful.
Yeah, it's, you know, I've always wondered, like, is it more helpful for fans to be specific, or for more helpful for fans to be like, we need more representation amongst existing characters, like, you know, because I've been really wrestling with that. Like, is it better for us to be like, I present with you a case file of the history of Wonder Woman, like, or is it more productive to be like, and I'll try to focus this as DC because it's not relevant to anything you're working on. It feels like it's DC for a bit. Like, is it easier to be like, we present to you this case file of Wonder Woman in addition to like Greg Rucka saying so, or is it to be like, just generally, we think it'd be nice if there was more existing characters with high profile who were queer women, you know?
I think I would say the latter, just because, you know, like as a Marvel writer, I have signed a contract about intellectual property and that kind of thing. So this is something I warn people a lot about a lot. Don't tell me your ideas because it voids them. It doesn't mean that I'll be the one who gets to tell them. It means that like that's exactly why I can't use that. Because eventually, like, what if you say something to me about, you know, a character that you know, you want to see this happening with them, and then later it happens in the comics, you'd be like, oh, she stole my idea. Here's where it is. So it does make sense in that way. The way that I approach these conversations is I try to stay within headcanon range, where we're all just talking about the characters who we see as gay or bi or pan or trans, and this allows me to kind of, you know, express the way that I feel about these characters, but also take the temperature and see what other characters people see themselves in, because that's a really important thing for me. And it also opens up my eyes to seeing characters as in different ways through different lenses that I wouldn't have known about before. And that's super important to me. So there's that. But I think, you know, just urging for more representation in general. Like there's this one person who, I can't remember their Twitter username, but, you know, like pretty consistently for weeks, they were tagging X-Men creators about like, can we please have trans representation? Can we please get more trans characters? And then eventually I had done enough work to get on their radar too and get asked about this. And it's like, yes, I want exactly what you want, but me telling you what I would like to do in this regard means I won't be able to pitch it. I can't say my real ideas online.
Yeah.
But it also got Tom Taylor to answer, like that consistent tweeting, and then me being like, yeah, you're right, absolutely. But
What
we
did
signed
Tom
contracts.
Taylor say?
Well, he was just like, oh yeah, I'm working on it.
That's great. And the thing I'm really trying to talk about in terms of that is like the value of having it be existing characters, because new characters tend to just sort of vanish. And
yeah see, that's what I'm afraid of too. Like my approach to these things is I don't know when I'm going to get an opportunity to create a new character, and have them be not immediately like be killed off or something. So my like biggest concern is there needs to be a trans X-Men. There needs to be an American Black X-Men. There needs to be somebody whose heritage in this country comes from somebody who didn't come here willingly 200 years ago. You know what I mean? That should be a very important and visible part of the X-Men. And it's also, if I ever get the chance to do these things, because that's not something that I know, I would want to approach it in a way like make it count and make it stick.
Yeah.
And I'm a new writer. I'm not on an ongoing title. I'm not creating characters right now. I'm not in a position where I would feel comfortable doing these things yet. I'm doing a lot with the pages I do have, a lot more than I ever thought was possible. But I know, because of the way I'm so vocal about queer issues online and being queer, that I'm not going to get many opportunities to like really run with that in the comics. And when I do see the opportunity for it, I got to make it count. I got to make it something as big as I can.
Well, thank you so much. I think you've really provided a lot of important context for listeners in terms of how we think about supporting diverse representation in comics and helping creators, especially helping queer creators, to be able to do their jobs as best they can for the sake of all of us. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for, the appropriate forum to talk about these things. It does seem like there's a lot of misconceptions about what's going on behind the scenes, and I always want to be as transparent and honest as possible.
Thank you. It's super refreshing and helpful. So for our listeners, you can keep up with Leah's amazing work, certainly on Twitter, where your handle is...
It is My Monster is Chic, CHIC. You can also just search Leah Williams and you'll find me. This
is true. But yeah, she's very big on Twitter. You should definitely follow her there. Your website is leahmedia.com, Leah media.com. And you have a great Tumblr, which I am following, loppett.tumblr.com. And you should go and pick up the new Dejah Thoris and my brain is just falling out my ear. The new Barbarella Dejah Thoris comic series. Now that you can get it, it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, the first issue comes out January 9th, and I'm super excited about it.
Woohoo! Well, thank you again. And for our listeners, we will be having more interviews coming up soon, and also some coverage of The Punisher. So join us for that. And as we'd like to say on this show, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.